Dust swirled across the wide road as the woman stepped off the coach. Her dress was worn, the hem frayed from travel, and a single carpetbag hung at her side. The town looked like every frontier town she had passed before. Wooden storefronts, a saloon with swinging doors, and eyes that followed strangers too long. She was used to stares, but today they felt sharper, as if the whole place already knew her name. Clara kept her chin high. The stagecoach rattled away behind her, leaving only silence and the weight of judgment. She had come west chasing nothing more than work. Maybe a corner of life where she could breathe without whispers. But the frontier had a memory as long as any city street, and even here her past was faster than her feet. She tried the hotel first. The keeper, a man with a red face and a thinning crown of hair, looked her over from boots to bonnet. His mouth curled before he even asked her name. "No rooms left," he said flatly, though Clara could see a key dangling on the board behind him. She did not argue. She had learned not to. Across the street she entered the saloon. The room smelled of tobacco and spilled whiskey. A few card players paused mid-hand. The barkeep leaned on the counter, wiping a glass with a rag that looked no cleaner than the wood itself. "We don't serve the likes of you," he muttered, too soft for anyone else to hear but clear enough. The card players smirked, one of them whispering something that made the others laugh. Clara left without a word, her cheeks burning, though she forced herself to walk steadily. Shame was no stranger, but it still stung every time. She crossed to the livery, hoping for day work, mucking stalls, brushing down horses, anything. The stable hand, a boy not much older than 16, looked eager to help, but an older man appeared from the shadows, pulling the boy aside. He whispered, then turned to Clara with a stiff shake of his head. "Not here." The sun sank lower, and with it her hope. Every door closed before it opened. Every face had already chosen against her. She sat on a water trough at the edge of town, clutching her bag. She could not go back, but she could not stay either. That was when she noticed the man. He stood a little apart, near a wagon stacked with sacks of grain. His clothes were plain, a farmer's work coat patched at the elbows. His face was weathered but calm, the kind of quiet that came from years in open fields. He didn't stare like the others. He just looked at her once, then returned to tightening the ropes on his wagon. Clara lowered her eyes, expecting nothing. But when the church bell rang for evening service and townsfolk drifted that way, he did not follow. Instead, he walked across the road toward her. Each step seemed measured, not hurried, not hesitant. When he stopped a few paces away, he tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am," he said in a voice low and steady, "you look like you could use a meal." The words were simple, but to Clara they felt almost impossible. No suspicion, no sneer, only plain kindness. She searched his face for a trap, for pity, for anything she had learned to expect, but he only waited, patient as the fields must be for rain. Her throat tightened. She wanted to refuse, to hold to the only armor she had left. Distance. Yet hunger gnawed. And more than hunger, the ache of being seen as something other than a shadow. She managed a small nod. He lifted her carpetbag as if it weighed nothing and motioned toward the wagon. "It's a bit of a ride," he said, "but the table's set." For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to follow. The wagon rattled along the dirt road, wheels creaking as the horses trotted steadily. Clara sat on the wooden bench, her hands folded tight in her lap. She could feel the weight of silence between them, but it was not heavy in the way she expected. This silence felt open, almost safe, as though the man beside her did not need to fill it with questions or judgment. The fields stretched wide on either side, the horizon burning with the last light of day. Wind bent the tall grass, whispering through the stalks. Clara had forgotten how big the sky could feel when no buildings blocked it. For a moment the vastness almost swallowed her, but then she looked at the man and steadied herself. "My name's Clara," she said finally, voice low. He nodded once, eyes on the horses. "Daniel, no more, no less." He did not ask where she came from nor what brought her to town. That alone unsettled her more than prying would have. But his quiet was not cold. It was respectful, like he believed a person's story belonged to them until they chose to give it away. The road narrowed, curving past cottonwood trees. At last, a small farmhouse came into view, its roof patched with fresh shingles, its porch plain but neat. A lantern glowed faintly through the window. Beyond the house, Clara saw a barn and a stretch of dark soil tilled for planting. The place was not grand, but it looked solid, like it had been built with care. As the wagon rolled to a stop, the door of the house creaked open. A little girl ran out, her braids bouncing, her shoes scuffing the porch steps. "Pa!" she called, then froze when she saw Clara sitting beside him. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't expected a child. Daniel climbed down first, lifting the girl into his arms. She looked about 6 or 7, her eyes sharp as a sparrow's. She clung to her father's neck, but her gaze never left Clara. "This is Anna," Daniel said simply. Then to the girl, "She's a guest." Anna didn't answer, only hit her face against his collarbone. Clara lowered her eyes, unsure if she could withstand the judgment of one more person, even a child. Inside, the house smelled of stew and wood smoke. The table was set with 3 bowls, steam rising from a pot. Daniel placed Clara's bag near the door and motioned for her to sit. Clara hesitated, then slipped into a chair. Her hunger betrayed her. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the spoon. The first taste nearly broke her resolve. Warmth spread through her chest, and she had to blink hard to keep from showing just how long it had been since a meal like this. Daniel said nothing, only ate at his steady pace. Anna poked at her food, glancing up every few minutes as though studying Clara. When the bowls were empty, Daniel rose and carried the dishes to the wash basin. Clara tried to help, but he only shook his head. "You've traveled far. Rest tonight," she wanted to argue. She owed him already. Food, shelter, a kindness she had not earned. But exhaustion pressed heavily, and she nodded instead. He showed her to a small room off the hall, where a quilt lay folded on a narrow bed. Clara closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She should not stay. She should leave before morning, before gratitude turned into something she could not repay. Yet when she sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand across the quilt, she felt a strange tug inside. For the first time in years, a door had opened instead of closing, and she did not know if she was strong enough to walk away. Morning broke with a thin veil of mist over the fields. Clara woke to the sound of a rooster crowing, and the smell of wood smoke drifting in from the stove. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the plain wooden walls, the folded dress on the chair, and remembered the farmhouse, the farmer, the little girl who had looked at her like a stranger in her own home. Clara splashed water on her face from the basin, tied her hair back, and stepped into the kitchen. Daniel was already there, pulling on his coat, his hands rough and strong from work. He nodded at her, not surprised she had risen early. "I'll be in the barn," he said, voice as steady as before. Plenty to do. Clara didn't wait for an invitation. She followed, determined to repay at least part of what she owed. The barn was cool and smelled of hay and horses. Daniel lifted a pitchfork, spreading fresh straw. Without a word, Clara took another fork, leaning by the wall, and began to work. Her arms ached quickly, but she pushed through, refusing to falter. Daniel glanced at her once, then returned to his task. He didn't stop her, didn't scold, didn't tell her to go back inside. By the time the stalls were clean, sweat clung to Clara's temples. Daniel carried 2 heavy pails to the trough, his steps firm. She hurried to take one, nearly stumbling under the weight. He reached to steady the handle, but didn't take it from her. Instead, he let her share the burden, and together they carried it out. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, not empty but full, like the rhythm of shared work had its own language. Later, Anna appeared in the doorway, hugging a rag doll tight to her chest. She watched Clara with those sharp little eyes. Clara forced a smile, but the girl only turned away, slipping back toward the house. Clara's chest pinched at the rejection, though she told herself she deserved no better. Through the morning, Clara helped where she could, feeding hens, gathering eggs, dragging brush to the edge of the field. Her hands blistered, but her spirit steadied with every task. Work was something she understood. Work had always been her shield. At midday, they ate bread and cheese under the shade of a tree. Daniel sat with his back against the trunk, quiet as ever. Clara chewed slowly, her eyes roaming over the farm, the tilled rows, the weathered fence, the neat stack of firewood. Every inch bore his hand, his care. It was the kind of life she had never known, simple but rooted like the soil itself claimed him. She found herself asking, "Why offer me a place here? You didn't even know my name." Daniel wiped his hands on his trousers. His gaze stayed on the field, not on her. A person doesn't need a name to be hungry. The word settled deep inside her, heavier than kindness, sharper than pity. He had not asked her history, not weighed her worth on a scale of purity. He had simply seen her need. Clara turned her face away, blinking fast against the sudden sting in her eyes. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. That evening, when the chores were done, she stood at the edge of the porch watching the horizon darken. Anna crept close, doll in hand, and whispered, "Are you staying?" Clara froze, heart thudding. The girl's voice held neither welcome nor rejection, only a child's blunt curiosity. Clara opened her mouth, but no answer came. Because the truth was she didn't know. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of earth and wood smoke. Somewhere behind her, Daniel's steady footsteps crossed the porch. For now the question hung in the air, unanswered. But in her chest something fragile stirred, something that felt dangerously like hope. The days turned into weeks, and Clara found a rhythm on the farm. She rose early with Daniel, worked until her muscles ached, and sat at the table each evening with Anna, who still watched her carefully, but no longer hid behind her doll. The silence between them all had grown less sharp, softened by shared chores and the steady pace of life. But beyond the farm's fence, whispers stirred. It began at the general store. Clara had gone alone one morning, basket on her arm, to buy flour and soap. At first, the storekeeper greeted her politely, but when two women entered behind her, everything shifted. Their voices dropped low, but their words carried clearly in the narrow room. "Did you hear who Daniel Harper brought out to his farm?" one whispered. "A woman from nowhere," the other replied, lips pursed. "And not the decent kind." Clara's cheeks flamed. She kept her eyes on the sack of flour, gripping it so tightly her fingers ached. The storekeeper's smile thinned, and suddenly the air inside felt too heavy to breathe. She paid quickly and left, her steps stiff against the wooden boards. When she returned to the wagon, Daniel was waiting. He didn't ask what was wrong, but his eyes lingered on her face a moment too long, as though he had guessed. She turned away, unwilling to let him see the hurt. By evening, the gossip had grown legs. Men at the saloon laughed over their cards, naming her with crude jokes. Women shook their heads outside the church, pity sharp as knives. Clara tried to ignore it, burying herself in work, but the voices clung to her like burrs. And then came the rival. His name was Carter Reeves, a broad-shouldered man with a fine hat and a mean grin. He owned land to the north, though rumor said he wanted more. Reeves appeared at the fence line one afternoon, leaning against the rails like he owned the place. Daniel kept working the soil, steady and silent, but Clara felt his presence like a storm cloud. "Heard you took in a stray," Reeves called, his tone dripping with mock sweetness. "Word is she's got a history. A man like you should be careful who he lets near his daughter." Clara's throat closed. She turned to leave, but Daniel straightened at last, wiping his brow. His voice was calm, but his jaw was set. "You've no call to speak of my guests," Reeves chuckled, slow and cruel. "Guests don't stay long on this frontier, not when folks know what they are." He tipped his hat toward Clara, his eyes glinting, and sauntered off. That night, Clara sat awake on her narrow bed, the quilt bunched in her fists. She had known peace would not last, She had known her past would find her even here, yet it was worse than she imagined because now, her shame had spilled onto Daniel and Anna too. She told herself she should leave before more damage was done. But every time she pictured walking away, the thought of Anna's sharp little eyes and Daniel's steady kindness stopped her. The next Sunday at church, the whispers grew bolder. A woman in the pew behind Clara leaned close to another, loud enough for all to hear. "That's her. Mark my words, Daniel Harper's a fool for taking her in." Clara sat frozen, her hands folded tight in her lap. Shame burned through her, but before she could rise and flee, she felt a weight beside her. Daniel's hand rested briefly over hers, firm and steady. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The gesture was enough to hold her still, to keep her from running. But Clara knew the storm was only beginning. The church was full that Sunday, the wooden benches crowded, the hymn book pages rustling like restless wings. Clara sat stiff beside Daniel, and Anna tucked close to his side. She tried to focus on the preacher's words, but her mind buzzed with whispers. She could feel eyes on her, feel the weight of every glance, every unspoken word. When the service ended, the townsfolk lingered outside in the sun. Some greeted Daniel with polite nods, but their eyes slid over Clara as if she were smoke. Others did not bother with politeness. It happened quickly. A woman stepped forward, her bonnet shadowing sharp features. "Mr. Harper," she said loudly, "we've all heard what kind of woman you've brought under your roof. We deserve to know what example you're setting for your daughter, and for this town." The crowd stilled, heads turned. Clara's breath caught, her throat closing. She wanted to disappear, to fold into nothing. But the woman pressed on, her voice rising. "A man's reputation is one thing, but a child should not be raised near sin." The words cut deeper than Clara had thought possible. Her past, the things she had tried so hard to outrun, now hung in the air for all to hear. She could feel Anna's small hand grip her father's sleeve, eyes wide with confusion. Clara could not bear it. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to stand. Her voice trembled, yet it carried enough to reach them all. "She's right," Clara whispered. "I am not pure." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. No one moved. No one spoke. Clara felt the world tilt, as if her confession had sealed her fate at last. Her chest burned with shame. She lowered her gaze, waiting for Daniel to turn away, for Anna to shrink from her. But Daniel did not move. Slowly, he stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the crowd. His voice was steady, deep, and calm, though it carried like thunder. "Then she's human," he said, "and worthy, as much as any of you." The words hung in the air, sharp and impossible to ignore. Some gasped, others frowned, but no one dared answer. Daniel reached back and took Clara's trembling hand in his. His touch was firm, unashamed. For the first time in years, Clara did not feel invisible or judged. She felt defended. She felt seen. The woman in the bonnet pressed her lips tight, her face red with fury, but she said no more. The crowd shifted uneasily, some looking away, others whispering. But no one challenged Daniel's words. Anna peeked up at Clara, her eyes wide. Clara braced for rejection, but instead, the girl leaned closer to her father, never letting go of his sleeve. Clara's chest ached with something that felt dangerously like belonging. The walk home was quiet. Clara expected Daniel to release her hand once they left the crowd, but he did not. His grip remained steady, a silent promise against the whispers of the town. That night, after Anna was tucked into bed, Clara stood at the window staring at the moonlit fields. Her heart was a storm. Fear, relief, wonder, and guilt tangled together. She had spoken her shame aloud, expecting it to destroy what little she had. Instead, Daniel's gentle words had changed everything. For the first time, she let herself imagine a life not defined by the past. A life where a hand reached for hers, not to push her away, but to hold her steady. The summer sun baked the earth hard, and the farm grew quiet under its weight. Clara found herself stronger now, her arms used to the work, her steps sure across the fields. Anna still studied her often, but sometimes, when Clara brushed the girl's hair or mended a doll's dress, Anna's small smile slipped through. Those moments lit something inside Clara she had never known, a fragile warmth, a piece of family. But peace never lasts long when envy is near. Carter Reeves returned. At first it was talk, rumors planted in the saloon, whispers carried from porch to porch. He claimed Daniel's land had been filed wrong years ago, that the boundary fence cut into his property. Men at the bar listened, nodding, drinking, laughing at the thought of Reeves finally getting what he wanted. Daniel stayed silent. He had papers locked in a box beneath his bed, signed and sealed. But Reeves did not care for papers. He cared for power, and he knew the town liked a scandal more than the truth. One evening, Clara and Daniel returned from the field to find the pasture gate swinging wide. Half the cattle had wandered off. Daniel tracked them until nightfall, Clara at his side with a lantern. It took hours to gather them back. The fence posts had been sawed halfway through, left ready to collapse. Daniel said little, but Clara saw the set of his jaw, the tightness in his shoulders. She knew Reeves's hand was in it. Days later, smoke rose from the far corner of the field. By the time they reached it, a small fire had eaten into the brush pile Daniel had stacked for clearing. They beat it down with wet sacks until their arms ached, but the warning was clear. Clara's fear grew heavier with each act. She had been shunned before, mocked, turned away, but never had someone tried to drive her out with fire and sabotage. It wasn't just her now. Daniel's farm, Anna's home, the small piece of peace she had found, all of it was under threat. One night, when the lantern burned low, Clara sat across from Daniel at the table. His face was shadowed, his hands scarred from the day's labor. She wanted to ask why he bore it all so quietly, why he didn't fight back harder, but she already knew the answer. Daniel was not a man of many words. His strength was not in shouting or threats. It was in patience, in steady work, in soil turned year after year until it bore fruit. Yet Clara feared patience would not be enough against a man like Reeves. "Maybe I should go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's after me, not you. If I leave, maybe he'll stop." Daniel's eyes lifted slowly. He shook his head once, firm. "This is your home as much as mine." The words sank deep, almost too heavy to bear. Home. No one had ever spoken that word for her, not in truth. Clara looked away, her throat thick. She wanted to believe him, to let the word wrap around her like shelter. But fear gnawed inside. She knew Reeves was not finished. Outside, the wind rattled the barn doors, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. Clara shivered, clutching the quilt tighter around her shoulders. She prayed silently that she had the strength to stand when the storm broke, because it was coming, and soon. The first frost touched the edges of the fields when trouble finally arrived. The sky was pale with stars, the farmhouse quiet, when the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Clara sat upright in bed, heart pounding. From the window she saw lanterns moving, shadows of men on horseback circling the barn. She rushed to the hallway as Daniel pulled on his boots. His face was calm but grim, the look of a man who had expected this night. He handed Clara the rifle from above the door. "Stay with Anna," he said, his voice low. "Don't let them near her." Clara's hands trembled as she took the weapon. She had held a gun before, but never for something like this, not for family, not for home. Daniel stepped outside, the porch boards creaking under his weight. Carter Reeves's voice carried across the yard, sharp and mocking. "Harper, time's up. That land's mine, and so's your pride. Best pack up before we burn you out." Clara's blood ran cold. She crept to Anna's room where the girl clung to her doll, eyes wide with fear. Clara knelt beside her, whispering, "Stay quiet. Stay close." Outside, hooves stamped, men shouted. Daniel stood his ground in the yard, lantern light flickering across his weathered face. "You've no claim here, Reeves," he said steadily. "Go home." Reeves spat in the dirt. Two of his men dismounted, striding toward the barn with torches in hand. Clara's fear turned to fire. She could not watch them destroy the only place that had ever felt like hers. She pushed Anna behind the bed and slipped to the doorway, rifle clutched tight. Her voice rang out before she could think. "Drop the torches!" The men stopped, startled. The lantern light caught her face, and one laughed. "Look here, it's the stray. Thinks she's got teeth." Clara raised the rifle higher, her finger steady on the trigger, though her heart thundered. "Take one more step and you'll find out." Something in her eyes must have told them she meant it. The men hesitated, torches flickering in the wind. Reeves snarled, furious at the sight. "You think that woman makes you strong, Harper? She'll drag you down." But Daniel stepped closer to Clara, standing shoulder to shoulder with her. His voice was iron. "She stands with me. That makes us stronger than you'll ever be." The men shifted uneasily. Firelight wavered against the barn walls, but Clara held steady, her arms locked tight. The silence stretched until even the horses stamped nervously. Finally, Reeves cursed and yanked his reins. "This isn't finished," he spat. With a sharp whistle, his men pulled back, mounting up. The torches fell into the dirt, sputtering out. One by one, the riders vanished into the night, their hoofbeats fading down the road. Clara sagged, breath shuddering from her chest. Daniel reached and lowered the rifle from her hands, his touch gentle. For a moment, their eyes met in the lantern glow. No words passed, but the meaning was clear. She had chosen to stay, to fight, to claim this life as hers. Anna crept from the house then, her small voice trembling. "Pa?" Daniel knelt, pulling her close. Clara stood behind them, her hands shaking but her spirit firm. She had stood her ground. She had defended the child. And for the first time in her life, she felt not just forgiven, but needed. The night air was cold, the farm scarred by fear. Yet in that moment, Clara knew something had changed forever. Morning came gray and cold. The farmyard bore the marks of the night, hoofprints in the dirt, broken fence rails, a torch half buried in the mud. Clara walked among the signs of what might have been, her hands brushing against the wood, her body still trembling from the memory of fire and shouting. Daniel worked quietly, repairing the fence with steady hammer blows. His silence was not heavy, only focused, as though fixing what was broken was his answer to fear. Clara watched him, her chest tight. She had seen him stand unshaken against Reeves, but she also knew the danger was not gone. By noon, news had spread. Men from town arrived at the edge of the yard, some curious, some concerned. Reeves himself did not come, but his words traveled faster than horses. He claimed Daniel's farm was stolen ground, that the woman he had taken in was proof he lacked honor. Clara felt their stares again, just as she had in the saloon, the store, the church. But this time she did not shrink. She stood tall beside Daniel, her hands raw from work, her eyes unflinching. One of the townsmen, older and cautious, asked, "Is it true? Did Reeves have a claim to this land?" Daniel set down his hammer and walked into the house. He returned with the box from beneath his bed, opening it in full view of all. Inside lay the papers, deeds, maps, signatures. He placed them in the man's hands without hesitation. The papers were passed from hand to hand. Murmurs rose. Reeves's lies, laid bare in ink and seal, began to crumble. Still, doubt lingered, and then Clara stepped forward. Her voice carried clearly, though her heart raced. "Reeves came with fire and lies. He wanted this farm not for the soil, but to ruin what he could not have. You all know it. You've seen it." The crowd stirred uneasily. Some averted their eyes, but others nodded faintly. Daniel spoke then, his words steady, unshaken. "This land is mine. This home is ours, and no rumor, no man will drive us out." Clara felt the shift in the air. For the first time, Daniel had spoken not just for himself, but for her too. The word ours echoed inside her, striking deep. The men exchanged glances, then began to leave one by one. None offered Reeves's defense. None carried his threats further. By dusk, only the quiet fields remained, the danger scattered like smoke. That night, the three of them sat at the table in silence, the lantern casting soft light over their faces. Anna leaned against her father's arm, her small voice breaking the quiet. "She saved me," the girl whispered, her eyes on Clara. "She's brave." Clara's throat tightened. She looked down, unable to speak, but Daniel reached across the table and laid his hand gently over hers. His grip was warm, steady, and this time he did not let go. The storm had broken, the rival driven back. Yet what lingered was stronger than fear, stronger than shame. It was the bond forged in fire, in standing shoulder to shoulder when everything seemed lost. Clara realized then that she was no longer a guest, no longer a shadow passing through. She belonged to this place, to these two souls who had taken her in. And though the road ahead would still be hard, she knew she would not walk it alone. Winter came, sharp and cold, but the farm stood firm. The fences were mended, the cattle safe, the fields resting under frost. Inside the farmhouse, the hearth burned steadily, filling the rooms with warmth. Clara moved through the house with sure steps now, her hands busy, her heart steadier than ever before. The gossip in town had not vanished, but it had thinned. People spoke less boldly after Reeves's lies were exposed. Some still looked at Clara with suspicion, but others quietly began to nod in greeting when she passed. The sharpness of judgment was duller now, softened by the truth that had come to light. One morning Daniel set his tools aside and spoke simply, as if asking nothing more important than the weather. "Stay here." As wife, Clara froze, breath catching. His words were plain, without decoration, but they carried weight deeper than any poetry. She had dreamed of belonging, but never of marriage. Not for a woman like her, not after the life she had lived. Her eyes filled, though she tried to hold them steady. "Are you sure?" "My past." Daniel shook his head gently, his eyes calm and unwavering. "The past doesn't change what you are now. Doesn't change who you've become here." She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to quiet the storm inside. For so long she had been marked by shame. Now here was a man who looked at her and saw more. She whispered the only answer her heart could give. Yes. The wedding was small. No grand hall, no long procession. Just the preacher, a handful of neighbors, and the winter sky clear above them. Clara wore a simple dress, one she had mended herself. Anna stood at her father's side, her braids tied neatly, her small hand gripping Clara's. When the vows were spoken, Clara's voice trembled but did not falter. Daniel's words were steady as ever, but his eyes softened when they met hers. For the first time, Clara felt the past lose its grip. In its place was something new, quiet, strong, unshakable. After the ceremony, they returned to the farmhouse. Neighbors offered handshakes, a few even smiles. The kitchen table groaned with food brought as gifts, pies, bread, jars of preserves. Clara stood in the middle of it all, her heart overwhelmed by the simple truth. She had a place now, a name spoken with respect, a family who called her theirs. That night, Anna climbed into her lap, her doll tucked under one arm. "Ma," she whispered, as if testing the word. Then she smiled, shy but sure. "You're Ma now." Clara's arms tightened around her, tears slipping down her cheeks. It was the sweetest word she had ever heard. Daniel sat nearby, quiet as always, but the curve of his lips was softer, almost a smile. He met Clara's eyes, and in that moment no words were needed. They had endured fire, whispers, and loss. What remained was stronger than all of it. The farmhouse glowed with lamplight, the wind howling outside. Inside, Clara felt something she had thought lost forever. peace. Spring returned soft and green. Snow melted from the ridges and the earth woke again. Clara knelt in the garden, her hands deep in the soil, planting seeds beside Anna. The girl chattered about dolls and calves, her voice light as birdsong. Clara smiled as she worked, the rhythm of the soil steadying her. Daniel moved in the field, guiding the plow behind the mule. His figure was strong against the wide sky, steady as always, shaping the earth into neat rows. Clara watched him for a moment, a quiet warmth filling her chest. He had been her shield, her anchor, and somehow, without asking for anything in return, he had given her a new life. The farm was not grand. The house was plain, the barn patched, the tools old from years of use. But to Clara, it was more beautiful than any place she had ever known. Each board, each stone, each field felt earned, held together by labor and love. Neighbors still talked, but now their words carried less sting. Some even came to share meals or ask Daniel's help with planting. They nodded to Clara in passing, some offering shy smiles. Time had softened the sharpness of suspicion, turning it into something almost like respect. Clara found herself humming as she worked, something she had not done since she was a girl. She hung washed linens in the sun, baked bread that filled the rooms with warmth, and laughed softly when Anna raced through the yard with bare feet. The sound of her own laughter startled her at first, but then it felt natural, as if it had been waiting all along to return. In the evenings, the three of them sat on the porch watching the light fade over the fields. Daniel smoked his pipe in silence. Anna leaned against his arm, and Clara sat close, her hand resting lightly on his. Words were few, but they were not needed. The peace between them spoke louder than any speech. One night, as fireflies blinked over the grass, Clara whispered, "Do you ever think of what might have been if things had gone differently?" Daniel tapped his pipe, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "No use thinking on that. This is what it is. And it's enough." Clara let the words settle into her heart. Enough. For so long she had believed she was not enough, never worthy, never pure. But now, in this quiet life, with Daniel's steady presence and Anna's small arms around her neck, she knew the truth. She was not perfect. She was not unmarked by the past. But she was loved and she belonged. Years would pass. Seasons would turn. The farm would bear both hardship and harvest. But always at its heart there would be the three of them. A widower who offered kindness. A woman who found courage, and a child who whispered "Ma" with trust. Clara lifted her face to the night sky, the stars bright above the fields. Once she had been shunned, cast aside, left wandering with nothing but a bag in her hands. Now she had a home, a family, and a future, and in that quiet, she understood that love had not erased her past, it had transformed it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like. It truly helps more people discover these tales. Subscribe for more stories of love, courage, and redemption, and share this one with someone who believes in second chances.